Hey everyone, Brighton here with Pastor Adam, who gave this past Sunday's message, Grace is Enough, and you dug into Luke 7, verses 36 through 50. So thanks, Pastor Adam, for being here with me.
Sure thing, man.
Yeah, kind of getting into the flow now that we've kind of done a few of these. So one of the things that stuck out to me in your message was whenever you really dug into the difference between the so and the for in the verse 47. It says, I tell you, her sins, and they are many, have been forgiven. So or for, depending on the translation, she has shown me much love. So it's just like interested if you could dig into that a little bit more.
Yeah, I mean, it's always a little confusing, right?
Yeah,
I mean, kind of from our context.
English is confusing.
But like from our context, with a familiar story to a lot of us, it would seem like if you're playing the movie in your head, right? It would seem as though if you just cut out that little part, it would seem that she's doing all this stuff for Jesus. So his reaction is, well, okay, great job. Yeah, I'll forgive you. And we know that's not how grace works. We know that's not what the gospel is. And so I wanted to show a little bit more clearly what's really going on there. So taking a look at the word in Greek, which I'm not a Greek expert. I'm not a Greek expert, everybody. I'm not really even an English expert, but you know, it wasn't too difficult to do that little word study there and see that using the word so, at least the way I think about English, is much more clear for the progression of how that forgiveness, how that grace happens in that moment. Yes. And then also, you know, we have this habit as preachers or as people who do Bible study or people who just read or talk, you know, we pull out specific just verses, you know, we don't look at always the whole context like we should. And so you take the word study and then you put it together with the little parable that I didn't focus on too much, but they flow together. Like it's not like it's not like his forgiving of her sins happens opposite what is displayed in the parable that Jesus shares just a couple of verses before. And so I felt like trying to bring those two things out could clear up what can be a little bit of a confusing progression of grace and forgiveness. And I actually had one person after, I think it was after the 9:30 service, you know, this is someone who knows his Bible pretty well. And it was just like, you know, it's always been kind of confusing for me. And that was really helpful to sort of see how it plays in context and how it plays in language. And so even though I think I said in the message that I consider myself much more of a preacher than a teacher, I felt like teaching that would be helpful, and so I hope it was. Yeah. I definitely found it helpful. Hopefully you found that helpful as well. I mean, there's so many English translations, and different translations. I didn't even use the one that I normally use, because very few people use it. But yeah, I thought between the NLT, which I preached from, and the NIV, which is really common, and ESV, which I know a lot of people use, maybe to show how they use English a little bit differently. Try to get at the root of, not to pick on any one particular translation, but just to get at the root of, you know, what can we understand definitively that's happening here.
Great. And then another thing that I think stood out to many people, including myself, was your Santa analogy. That
it's not mine. I took
what the one that you gave on Sunday.
That's because I sang a song. You know, that's why.
That is true. That definitely.
I'm not going to do that again right now.
All right, that's okay. But yeah, like that might be a common thought that is not true about God, about Jesus.
Right.
So is there anything more about that you...
Yeah. Well, first of all, credit, at least where I heard it, was from a guy named John Lynch at a conference I was at 25 years ago. Okay. It's a long time ago for me, and I've just never, ever forgotten it. And I use it quite a bit. Yeah. With people, I think about it a lot. I see if I can kind of where I recognize and confess that in my own life when I operate that way. So yeah, I suspect that a whole lot of people in this church and in other churches they don't believe that Jesus is like Santa Claus, but they directly, but there's a lot of times the feelings or the actions might indicate that it is as though he's kind of like, you know, making lists and checking them twice and gonna decide how to treat you based on how it is that you've performed.
Right.
And that's just it's a culture that we live in. You know, we're awash in that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Both inside the church, outside the church. It's everywhere. And so it's hard to escape it. So I thought it would be helpful just to point it out, to recognize it. And hopefully a lot of people, despite the silliness of the analogy, I mean, hopefully a lot of people are like, oh, wow, yeah, they're not the same. And that matters.
Yes.
Santa, as he's presented in that song or in the legend of Santa Claus, like he's not full of grace. He's using other things as motivators, like fear,
yes,
performance. And Jesus does not use fear or performance as motivators. He uses grace.
Right.
And I wanted to point out the distinction, to hopefully challenge a few folks to just think twice about, what is my image of God? What is my image of Jesus?
Yeah.
And as silly as it sounds, is it more like Santa Claus? Or is it more like the Jesus that we see in the Bible?
Right.
So that's kind of what the point was behind that.
Right.
But when you sing a silly kid's song from the pulpit in May, it's a Christmas song, people's eyes tend to be like, what's he doing?
Yeah.
You know, it's like, oh, this is gonna get weird.
The images that you had on the screen also were, I don't know how much you really dug into finding those images.
The Jesus image I loved.
Yeah.
I just kept that one, but I Googled for those images.
Yeah.
And I had some Santa options that I thought would have been much more illustrative of evil Santa.
Yeah, yeah.
But I was like, maybe not.
Yeah, I mean, grouchy Santa still like seeing it up on the screen.
Yeah, there were some that were probably a bit inappropriate for the context.
Right.
But they would have made the point, I think, even better than the little cartoon I settled on.
Okay. Yeah. But it was all very good, yes, and I like that illustration because I think it definitely is something that we need to be checking ourselves as well with what is our view of God and making sure that it is true in his nature of who God is.
Right. Yeah, and you'll hear me use it again. I use it kind of a lot. I mean, people who are just in the different things that I participate in and help lead, they're like, oh, here comes the Santa Claus thing again from Pastor Adam.
Yeah.
I'm like, well, I think it's important, right? But I don't know that I've ever, or maybe it's been a very long time since I mentioned it on a Sunday. So hopefully it was helpful to me.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, I think that I won't take up any more of your time. I think we kind of covered what it is that we would like to talk about. So thanks again for being here with us.
Absolutely.
All right. Hopefully that was an encouragement to you. And we will want to wish you to have a great rest of your week. And we will catch you again next week. All right. See ya.
See ya.